I went ahead and put a 3D Garage logo on the side there, doing the exact same technique as we did earlier for the hood. Okay, so you can see how easy it is just to create a selection set, make that group, and then set that group to the selection set, and then you've got an isolated area just to put a logo. And in this case, mine actually looks a little bit tall now that I'm looking at it, so all I got to do is go to my size and shrink that down just a little bit. There we go. Cool. Okay, so you can do that throughout the car, anywhere you want. And then I'm going to get this back here to a set scene. In our next video, we're actually going to render this out for the final, but what I want to do in this video is make this just a little bit better. What we're going to do is go to the material section here, material selection, click on the ground, so we select the ground material right there. And while I'm at it, see the directional light up here in the item list? Let's turn that off, because that's on by default. We are lighting the scene with our environment, and that was the environment preset we put in a little bit earlier. So now all of the lighting is from the environment. The shadows are even more accurate. The directional light was in there as a default. We don't really need that. You can even just delete it if you want, but I'm just going to leave it there. Next, from this material, and we could even rename this ground material just to stay organized. We're going to add a layer, and in this case, we're going to go down to special. No, I take that back. We are going to go to textures, and then we're going to go to cellular. Okay, all of these in here, wood, weave, curvature, ripples, all of these are computer generated textures. So much like the image map of the Moto logo and the 3D Garage logo we put on there, this time we're actually going to put a computer generated texture on the ground. And here you can see a very large version of it. If I come over here, and we'll see how our advanced view holds up. My video card might not be able to handle all of it with the rendering and everything else. So what we can do is just turn that off, because it's not going to work. I'm going to zoom this view out so you can see it. Okay, so there is that texture placed on there in the render view. All right, well, we're not quite doing that. So what I want to do is come over here to the texture locator, and I'm going to set this down to about 2 millimeters for the X, Y, and Z. And now you're going to see this crackle texture, the cellular texture, much smaller and much more accurate in relationship to the size of the car. However, it looks kind of like little tiles right now, little Spanish tiles, something like that. So with this cellular texture selected, there's some properties over here. Now I can change the color if I wanted, make it match the car, but it's not actually what we're going to do with this. We're going to do this a little bit differently. What I want to do with this is make this look like a desert ground, kind of a cracked sort of cool looking desert. And the way to do that is, first thing I need to do is change the cell width. So that's right here. Our type is angular. There's also a round feature in here as well. So I've used this quite often for medical. So when you've got like a virus that you want to show grow. For instance, if I take the cell width, I make it 0, I get just nice little spots. Okay, great for freckles on a surface, great for dewdrops, things like that on an object. But if you animate this value, when we get to animation, you'll learn how to do this. You can increase those over time, which is kind of cool. But in this case, we're just using angular. And what I want to do with angular, we'll go back to the 60 that it was. That's the cell width. Now if I increase that, look what happens. I get sharper lines in between all of these. I'll give this a second to redraw. So I've got some great looking tiles with grout now. Or if I manipulate this a little bit further, I can actually make it look like a cracked desert. And that's what I'm going for. So the transition width as well, if I bring this down to, let's say, 5%, you get a much thicker. And if I bring it up to, let's say, 60%, you get a much thinner. Okay? We're going to keep it at the default 30 just so we can use it. Now, when you use bump maps, displacement maps, the high and low value is what's important. So the high value being the white, the dark value being the low. The white value is going to have more effect for the bump or displacement than a dark. Now, bump map, like we put on the logo up here on the hood, is only visual. There's really no bump whatsoever. It just looks like there is. What we're going to use now is a displacement map. And in this case, instead of diffuse color, we're going to right-click on here, come down to surface shading, choose displacement as the effect. Give this a second and look what happens. Whoa, a little crazy there. What's happening is that all of that geometry is being displaced because our displacement level is entirely too large. So earlier when I was talking about the work plane, and that's this guy in the bottom corner, and this grid, this overall grid, well, there's a measurement, and down here in the corner, this measurement says 5 meters. That means every square in here is 5 meters in length. If we go to the ground material, take a look at the displacement distance, it's 20 millimeters. Okay, well, look at the size of the car. Let me zoom in. Okay, as I zoom in, the measurement changes. Every grid is 200 millimeters. Okay, so we've got this displacement at 20 millimeters. So let's bring it down to 1 millimeter. There we go. A little more appropriate for the size of my scene. However, it's still a little bit too much. So let's bring it down to 0.5 millimeters. And then the next thing we're going to do, because the white is actually being displaced, it's actually pushing that geometry, we want it the opposite way. We want it to look like cracks. So we'll go back to the cellular texture and we'll hit invert. We'll give this a second here. And so now all those white areas are pushing down and the dark areas are coming up, or I guess in this case staying flat. Now this is a little still too much bump in there, or I should say displacement. So this is set to 500 UM. Let's bring it down to 100 UM. That NASCAR shouldn't be driving on something so bumpy. All right, I'll let that redraw. There we go. Okay, so these tiles now are physically displaced. And I don't think the quality would be too good because I don't have a ton of geometry and we could up that. But if we flew right in, you can actually go inside these cracks, unlike the bump map on the hood where you can only visually see it. So I'm going to Command S to save the scene. And I think we got enough time here to do a little bit more. So what I want to do is create a little bit more texture on here. And the way I'm going to do that is with another procedural. So we're going to go to Add Layer, Textures. Now we use cellular. There's some other ones in here, but we're just going to choose noise. And for that noise, we'll give it a second here to redraw. Noise, we also have to size down. And I'm going to size that down to 1 millimeter. And let's do a gang select. So click once, twice, type in 1 millimeter, hit the tab key for return. And then all values are equal. And we're sizing that down. Now, it's set now to diffuse color. And I can see little dark spots all over. So it's looking okay, but it's not quite what we want. So we've got to texture layers. We can not only change some color here, which is what we want, but let's just give it a little dirty brown here. We'll choose this preset here, and we'll just come down like that. A little dusty brown. I can change the blend mode from normal to, say, something like multiply, much like we would do in Photoshop. And then it's taking that texture, give it a second to redraw. There we go. It's taking that noise texture and multiplying it over my surface. Now you can keep layering everything up and just keep blending and layering and adding more displacement and adding more bump. But that layer then just helped dirty this up a bit. Not very strong. And if you wanted to make it stronger, we can very easily just, darken that up if you want. Let's change it to hard light now. And what you'll see is now the dark area is being removed and our light area is still showing. And I can come in here and change the color of this to something more interesting. Maybe with a little less color, of course, but dark spots like that. And then you can even take that noise, right-click on it, and create an instance, and then take the effect of that one and make that a bump map. So you're adding a bump on top of a displacement. It's actually the way you can create an ocean, too. Use your displacement for really large waves, but then use a bump map for the much smaller little detailed waves. And so now you've got all these bumps all over those cracks as well. And if we go to the ground material and we take that bump amplitude down to about 1 millimeter, it'll be a little more visible, not taking over our displacement map. So you can see you can just spend a lot of time just tweaking and adjusting these. But you can keep layering textures, layering everything on top. You can also add an image map. So you don't have to use one or the other. So for the car, we had a basic material, we had an image map, and we had a bump map. For the ground, we had a procedural texture, then we had a bump map. Well, what if we added both? So we're going to go to Add Layer, Image Map, Load Image. And there's a desert ground image, like that you can load. And you can try using that instead of a procedural if you like. And what we're going to do with that for the texture locator is we're going to take it on the planar, Y, click Auto Size. Now this image is entirely too large, I should say, entirely too small for this ground plane, so it's going to appear very large on here. If I move out like this and I come to my default view and I select the ground, you'll see that those cracks are entirely too large. Now I can size it down. I can go to Texture Locator, double click, and I can transform and scale that down. Now the only thing is this is not a looping image, so it's not going to repeat too well. So depending on your camera view, you may actually see those edges, and that would just require a little bit of Photoshop just to go in and adjust that. But depending on how we apply this and how we blend it to everything, it may actually be okay. Right now it's set to diffuse color, but if you go to Texture Layers, you can also change the blend mode to this. And if you place Multiply in here, it's going to pull it really dark. You can do a screen mode, so it kind of does an overlay, or you can do a soft light and just try it like that. Let me turn off the displacement just so you can render a little bit faster. So very easily you can just lay this on top, even look at the difference, look at the subtractive, and so on. Even just normal, and then you can take the opacity to say 50% just to lay that on top for a little bit of dirt. Totally up to you, but basically the idea is that you're blending these two. You're blending an image map and you're blending a displacement map. So I think I'm going to turn that off, go back to what we had. I just wanted to show you that you could do that. Let's move on to one more video for this, and I'll show you how to set up the final render.